Good evening. You're very welcome to this week's edition of Centre Ground. And tonight, the spotlight is on the housing crisis and homelessness. I'm joined by Anthony Flynn, who is the founder of Inner City Helping Homeless, by Asha Iqbal, who is a singer-songwriter. William Cummings is the founder of Babs Be Aware, Be Safe, which is the mental health unit within Inner City Helping Homeless, and by Michael Loughman, who is the founder of Sleep Out Cavan. And as always, Marion McGowan will anchor our panel discussion in the second half of the programme on the hot topic of the week. So I'll begin with Councillor Flynn. Anthony, you're very welcome to Centre Ground, and thank you for joining us. I know that you're really, really busy.
Thanks for having us, Marion.
So, Anthony,
sorry, Marion.
You're okay. Anthony, maybe you might begin by telling us how Inner City Helping Homeless came about and the work that you do.
So we would have been founded 7 years ago. We would have responded to the frontline crisis that was homelessness in Dublin. We had a serious issue in terms of rough sleeping on the streets of Dublin. That was very, very prevalent when we first initiated at Inner City Helping Homeless. We formed as a voluntary group organisation. We up to 80 volunteers on our first night that we went out onto the streets, and it just never stopped. 7 years later. We're one of the largest frontline homeless services in Dublin now that has an array of services such as our outreach support that we would have started with. We have our day services, we have our family support, we have our food poverty unit, we have the mental health team with Will and Babs. So we've grown and grown over the last number of years into something that's become frontline in Dublin. Right,
and I think we have a short video here that will kind of give us some idea of the vast amount of work that you do assisting people who are homeless in Dublin. So Stephen, if you can roll it there now, the video.
Inner City Helping Homeless was formed in November 2013 as a reaction to rough sleeper crisis that had presented in Dublin. It was a case of a small soup run around the city at that time. And we went out and made sure people were comfortable on the streets and people were supplied with sleeping bags and food once they couldn't get into a hostile environment at night time. Since ICHH started, it's a case of we primarily dealt with rough sleepers. We're looking at a situation now where we're very top heavy in regard to families, and I suppose for the first 2 years in operation our main goal would have been to engage with rough sleepers and provide support for rough sleepers. Homeless services has dramatically changed within that time period, and now we're looking at a case where we're dealing with more families and children that present on a daily basis. We have up to three families a day that may present here in our offices that would require assistance and support or accommodation needs. So we're in a situation now where we've had to basically respond or cope with demand as people have presented. We have more case presentations for families and young children at the moment, and I suppose when we first did set up, it was a case of the rough sleeper and engaging on the streets with the rough sleeper and advocating on their behalf. And the homeless services has just dramatically changed in that time period that we've been in operation, and we've had to respond to that change in the presentations of rough sleepers to families and young children. ICHH has a number of operations that go on. We have day services here, we have advocacy support services, we have case management, we have our kitchen where we would see people, volunteers in making sandwiches. We have our warehouse in operation where we see food redistribution from there. We have our fundraising department, we have people that work in our offices as admin and case management support. So we've grown absolutely tremendously particularly over the last 2 years, and we're seeing that we could have up to 180 volunteers that work right across the organisation at the moment. And they're all volunteers that come in here and offer those services and supports throughout the organisation. So we've seen a major increase in the amount of people that come in here and volunteer, and everybody has a role or part to play in what we do. On a nightly basis, we'd be looking at on average around 150 individuals that would have nowhere else to go after 11 p.m. at night. They would be bedding down, rough sleeping, and we'd either be provided with sleeping bags or referral for case management. The highest ever number was over 200 rough sleepers that we had engaged with on a particular night or over a particular period. that number does fluctuate according to weather. Spring, summer, some people sleep in parks and we might not be able to get to them. Others in the winter tend to move into facilities such as hostels. The big problem that we have with presentations is that there's never enough beds in the system in order to cope with demand. And we've never had a situation, I suppose, where we have a low number of rough sleepers on the streets. It's always a very high number, and again, it does rise periodically or through the year. So on average, we'd be looking at about 150 people per night on the streets.
Anthony, many of us have a kind of a perception that a homeless person is typically a man with addiction issues that's sleeping rough on the street. But you have been at pains for a number of years now on mainstream media to point out that the profile of homeless people has really changed in recent years.
Definitely over the last couple of years, and I suppose when we did form originally, when we set up, I suppose, the demographic of a homeless person was male, and it would have been, widely known that on the streets of Dublin in particular, you would have had people that had substance abuse issues and mental health issues, people that had issues with alcohol and stuff like that as well. And, very, very quickly after we had founded and I suppose organised, the demographic of homeless people changed dramatically into a situation where, we were nearly having as many homeless children as we were as homeless adults on the street. And those homeless children, I suppose, were hidden to a certain extent. And I remember we set up the My Name Is campaign a couple of years ago, and we travelled the length and breadth of the country. And we put the faces of homeless children on all of these placards. We basically showed people, this is the face of homelessness. This is what homelessness is about now. Homelessness is not just about what you thought it might have been many, many moons ago, when you had somebody that was in a blue sleeping bag and somebody that may be sleeping in a doorway. And that problem is still there. That problem still exists, and it's very prevalent nowadays. We're probably dealing with up to 150 people per night that are on the streets. But the demographic of homeless person has dramatically changed over the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years in particular, where we very young children, we have people that are coming from all walks of life. We have people that are working, that are living in fuel poverty, that are coming to our service looking for assistance in some way, shape or form. So, the realisation of that took a very, very long time, particularly around central government and local government and the DRHE maybe to respond, the local councils to respond. And even now, many local councils across the country don't respond in the manner that they should in terms of ensuring that families are supported in homeless services, or they don't even have a homeless service unit to respond to a family that may become homeless. I think last week we saw, again, the demographic, the changing. We've 160 odd people that are over the age of 65 that are homeless now across the country. These are old age pensioners. We never had old age pensioners homeless, many moons ago, but we do now, and that demographic is consistently changing month on month.
And I know that you gave an interview at the weekend to the Irish Mail, and I suppose the point that you made, which was picked up on by other mainstream media outlets, is the fact that you believe that we're heading into a winter of discontent, as it were. There's a big crisis facing homeless services this winter. Yeah,
definitely. And, what we saw through COVID-19 was, we saw many, many people that came to us looking for assistance, because we're not only providing a homeless service, we're providing a service in regard to, food provisions, basic food provisions for people that are living in poverty. And those numbers have been continuously on the rise month on month. We're also seeing so many people that are coming through for access to our mental health team and through BABS. But in terms of our food provision, we saw at one stage we were dealing with up to 5,000 people per month. Just on that basic programme, and that's outside of our normal day services and our outreach support services and the people that would be dealt with then through BABS and stuff. So we're seeing on every anchor that we're dealing with increase upon increase upon increase, but in particular those people that are now living in fuel poverty. And I know today there was a bill in the Dáil today around that, but we've been noticing this trend for many months. We've been noticing it for well over a year, where we've seen the consistency in people month on month looking for just basic food provisions and basic food parcels. And that's from every demographic. That's from families, units, to people that are either basically turning around now and saying, well, do we pay the mortgage? Do we pay the rent? Do we put the lights on? Do we put the gas on? Or do we feed ourselves? And they have to prioritise what, gets paid out every month. And, for many families that we would deal with, the priority would be that food would be the last thought, that they need a roof over their head, and that's not an Ireland that anybody should be looking at living in at this stage. We're a very, very rich country. We have means. And when we see so many people that come through our doors for access to those basic food provisions, it's saddening at the moment. And my fear is that although, we had a false dawn and a false skies really in regard to, individuals and the number of reductions over the last 3 months, and in particular, the reductions through the fact that the eviction ban was in place. We had an eviction ban in place, and we didn't see anybody being forced out onto the streets. We're going to see a tsunami of people that are going to be evicted from their homes through the winter months, a tsunami of single adults that are going to enter homeless services. That number is continuously on the rise, and unfortunately we're going to see another avalanche of children that are going to fall into homeless services, and it's not going to be nice, and it's not going to be a good winter.
Well, I suppose the government is investing millions of euro in homeless services, and I know that Patsy McGarry did an expose some years ago in the Irish Times where he pointed out that the main NGOs providing services for the homeless are duplicating a lot of their work. They're getting millions. Each of those organisations have a CEO that's earning in excess of €100,000 a year. So are you one of those people as head of inner city helping homeless? Are you drawing down, a massive salary in excess of €100,000 a year? And do you have?
Definitely not, and nowhere near that. And I was only appointed CEO over the last year, and in that I had been here for 5 years and worked salary free here for 5 years, and so did many of the other individuals that are here now. We've got 3 staff members that are paid, and they run an operation of up to 200 volunteers, and those salaries that are drawn down are absolutely nowhere near half of what those individuals or what other organisations would be looking at paying. And when we look at as you say, duplication of funds and duplication of services, we've got multiple organisations that are providing the same level of service around the city, and we're not, I suppose, from a regulatory point of view, looking into all of these organisations and saying, are we actually getting value for our money, number one, and why is the taxpayer paying so much money on a situation where we have 4 or 5 major NGOs that are considerably taking government funding on a yearly basis, and also getting a donation base, a massive donation base, again, the expenditure limits that are there are massive. We're talking about millions, 180 million euros in Dublin alone, just on homeless services paid by the DRHE last year. Only 400,000 of that was paid out in mental health supports from 180 million. So that will show you the lack of, I suppose, service implementation. What we're not doing, we're not providing the wraparound support services, and we've got so many. I suppose, the last time I looked, we'd over 10,000, last year, we'd over 10,000 NGOs in this state, in Ireland. The charity regulator announced this like it was great news, that we had over 10,000 NGOs across the country. I don't believe that is great news. I don't think we should have all of these NGOs. I think we should be in a position, where we should be combining services. We should be looking at amalgamating most of the services that are drawing down these massive amounts of money on a yearly basis, and we should be ensuring, we're paying more per person that's homeless on staff, which is absolutely ridiculous. There's more staff in homeless services now than there is homeless people, from what I can see. And in terms of drawing down that money, we've got a massive donation base that's every year, Christmas, everybody's giving to charities. And, charities are doing amazing work. We're not going to take away from the work we're doing. But what they've done is they've taken the responsibility of government and the services the government should be providing. And basically, we turned that into an industry. We're seeing a lot of private operators now enter the homeless service market. We're turning that into a direct provision, case where direct provision was basically sold out to private operators from day one, and that's happening right across the board. In particular, through COVID-19, what we saw was a major increase in the amount of people that were letting out hostels to the DRHE and letting out hotels where you never would have got a bed in any of these places before. But now, because they're empty, because there's nobody in them, it's a situation where those beds. One provider told me the DRHE are offering them €13 per person per night where before we would have been looking at paying 120 and 130 euro per person per night. So we've seen a major shift on that angle, paying out, I suppose. But again, you know, there's excessive amount of money being paid right through that system, and not only through the homeless service system, through every system. You know, for a small nation of 5 million people or so, and we look at having to pay, I suppose, you know, or look at having 10,000 charities. You know, we need to ask what are they all doing, and are we duplicating services? Because I see duplication.
Okay, well, it's a topic that I could spend, you know, much longer discussing with you, Anthony. Sadly, I'm going to have to leave it there for the moment, but I will be coming back to you in the second half of the programme. And thank you so much. Very, very insightful into what is actually happening at the moment in homeless services. It gives me great pleasure now to chat to my next guest, whom I've come to know a couple of years ago. She is an amazing singer-songwriter, and tonight she's going to chat to me a little bit about how she ended up in emergency accommodation. Asha, you're very welcome to Centre Ground.
Hi Anna, thanks for having me on.
Asha, you've given a number of interviews to radio stations in recent weeks, and so could you just give me a very brief outline of how you ended up in emergency accommodation?
Well, Anna, I ended up in emergency accommodation this time because I had been working full-time as a chef, and it had been temporary. I'd been staying with a friend temporary, but when the lockdown kind of came on, it just wasn't viable anymore. So it was a really I lost my job because I had just recently moved from one restaurant to another, and because I was the kind of last in, I was kind of the first out, so that was unfortunate. And I had to avail of inner city helping homeless services because it was in the middle of quarantine. I didn't know where I was going to end up or what was going to happen. So that's how I ended up homeless this time. But I do have a history of homelessness. I was first homeless when I was 17, and it would have been due to a family breakdown. And I wouldn't have gone into government kind of services back then, but it was 1998. It was a lot easier in those days. I got a job straight away, Celtic Tiger Times, as a kitchen porter. I had 2 jobs, I think, within the week, and I stayed a few nights on the street, but I was able to get into a tourist hotel, and that would have been £12 a night. And I was able to save up in a matter of weeks to get a place in Temple Bar. What's frightening to me about that now is there's a lot more young people who wouldn't have that opportunity now to either the jobs wouldn't be there, and also you're not going to find a room to share for a couple of euros, 100 euros, and you're not going to be able to stay in a tourist hostel at the age of 18. Things have changed dramatically since those times.
So really what you're saying to me is that job opportunities are few and far between, work is temporary, wages are low, and rents are high. And that's how a lot of young people, as far as you can see, are ending up homeless.
Yes, definitely. It's very hard for an 18-year-old to compete with older people who have more experience. I don't understand how any young person could afford to pay rent on minimum wage. So I think we have a situation now where unless you're from a family that can provide you with a stable, there's a lot of people and they live with their parents until their early 30s. It's,
Yes.
that's just the way it is now. But that's not viable for every young person. For a lot of
you're giving a very, very clear picture there. not everybody has family support, and when family support breaks down, young people can end up homeless. Now, I know that you have highlighted recently in mainstream media about the very strict rules and regulations in emergency accommodation. Would you like to tell me a little bit about those?
Well, Anna, I've stayed in both kinds of emergency accommodation. I've stayed in what would be regarded as a wet hostel, and you would be sharing a room, and there would be a lot of addiction, drug use. It would be very chaotic. It would be very chaotic. People would be very frightened. And I think this pushes a lot of people onto the street because they're afraid to, at least when they're on the street, they can be more independent, and you don't know who you're sharing a room with. Inside these hostels, the staff, it depends. I'm very, very fortunate where I am now that I have my own room. It's actually a hotel. It was working as a hotel before, but now it's operating as a hostel during the pandemic. The staff are lovely, the rooms are lovely, like I couldn't complain at all. And I'm very, very fortunate to be in this situation. But to be in the situation I'm in, it really is a matter of luck. There's no, it's strange. I could easily be in a more chaotic hostel, and there's no security to know that I will still remain in this hotel next week, tomorrow, you know, like that's the way it is at the moment. Yeah. And as a chef in the hospitality is a disaster right now, obviously, with the pandemic, things closing, opening, there's not hours, nobody knows what's going on. So that's the situation for me at the moment.
It is difficult for you. Now, you have a career also, aside from your career as a chef, you are a singer-songwriter, and you have written quite a number of songs, and I think we're going to hear one of them now. If Stephen, if you can just roll it there, Stephen, and you recorded this in a studio.
Yeah.
What is it called? It's called
Castle in the Sky, Anna.
It's called Castle in the Sky. And Stephen has actually put some images from inner city helping homeless to the music, and it kind of captures, I suppose, what it is like to be homeless. So
we searched for truth, but was aloof and so embarrassingly ugly. But that's alright, cause you know I can't seem to keep my shit together. And all these things, and all these things, and all these things, and all of these things. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? And does it matter? Everyone's got their angles, that's just the way it goes. Everyone thinks they're worst off, that's just the way it goes, I suppose. You've got your castle in the sky. You've got your castle in the sky. You've got your castle in the sky. You've got your castle in the sky.
Asha, as well as being helped by Inner City Helping Homeless yourself, you have now become a volunteer with them. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's been really interesting being a volunteer because I was homeless at a young age, and because I don't have family supports, it has made me more vulnerable. I feel like most of my life I've been thinking the rent, the rent, the rent. And especially since 2010 for me, this is when it really became more difficult. It really became more difficult to keep a roof over your head. There's less places. A few of my former accommodations, the last one is an Airbnb. The one before that is, it has lots of bunk beds and it takes in students. You're always thinking the rent, the rent, the rent. When I was younger, I would have lived in bed sits, and they're gone now. They're studios. There would be an average of like 1,500 euros. I did move to Leitrim, but the problem with Leitrim, that's where I actually trained to be a chef. But the problem with Leitrim is there was no work. I was very isolated. But I thought I was like one of Leo's lions going down there and
yes,
upskilling and retraining. That's what was said at that time. And it's really disgusts me when I hear people say things like, oh, homelessness is normal, people like to be homeless. I haven't come across one person who decided that, you know what, this is my life choice, I want to be homeless. And in the hostels, I've witnessed suicides, I've witnessed deaths, I've witnessed overdoses, I attempted suicides, violence, and mostly a lot of people are there for years. They're stuck in these hostels or hotels for years and they run out of hope. And people are living very, very sad lives, and it affects their self-esteem. It really does. And they get to a point where they think they wouldn't be able to have a job. Nobody cares about them. Their family are ashamed of them. It affects people's relationships. It affects your sleeping, because if you're in a chaotic hostel and there's a lot going on at night, you get used to being spoken to as a child. There's a lot of rules and regulations that you need to have, but at the end of the day, I'm a fully grown woman, I'm a qualified chef, and I lose a lot of autonomy. Even simple things like having a curfew, having my room checked to make sure I'm making my bed and stuff. I can't decorate, you can't decorate, you're only allowed to have a certain amount of stuff. And these are the things people as well, when they're in these situations for a long amount of time, they can become used to it, and then they struggle when they do get housing. They feel lonely. They're used to everything kind of being handed to them, and they forget how to look after themselves. And then it can become sort of a cycle for a lot of people as well.
Right. Well, Asha, you have given us an amazing insight into the life of a homeless person. And thank you so much for that. And we will be coming back to you in the second half of the programme. And it gives me great pleasure now to speak to William Cummings. William set up BABS, which is Be Aware, Be Safe, which is the mental health unit that operates within inner city helping homeless. William, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
I am, and thanks for having me on Centre Ground.
And maybe you might begin by telling me a little bit about BABS, how it came about and the work that it does.
So BABS came about after we had a family tragedy. One of my cousins actually committed suicide, and the family had actually reached out to try and get help, and she herself said that she had reached out but nobody was listening to her. And when I was standing in the at her funeral, a lot of what was being said actually resonated with me, because I'd had my own issues and nobody had listened to me. But I decided to set up my own listening service where people could come, and if you felt like you weren't being listened to, or you didn't know where to go, or the treatment or the people that were around you weren't listening and therefore you weren't getting the correct help, you could come to us and you could have a conversation. It was completely confidential. It was completely confidential, and you know that it was completely confidential, and and people were able to come and speak to us. So what we did was everybody else had offices, and we set up the first place dedicated to mental health in the city, and we set it up in Wilton Terrace at the Grand Canal. And what we did for the first 3 months was me and the sisters, we all went and got Mental Health Ireland training. We also got other training, and we would just have a free listening service where people could come and talk. When we set it up, we were expecting to get maybe 1 or 2 people come to us. It was actually quite shocking. In the first 3 months, we had over 150 people come and want to talk, and talked about their experience and asked us for help. So we started building up networks and trying to get the right help. And we also started advocating for people who would come and say, well, I've been on this house, it's not working, but my doctor won't give me any information. What I did was some of the people that were coming to us at Wilton Terrace were experiencing homelessness, so I contacted Councillor Anthony Flynn, and I asked him if I would be able to come in.
I suppose this is a live stream, and the phone ringing.
Yeah, sorry.
I think William spends a huge amount of his time taking phone calls from people who have mental health issues. So I suppose the fact that his phone continues to ring while we're going out live just illustrates the fact that it never stops. And I know that I was chatting to you a couple of times this week, and you had to cut short our phone call to answer the phone because there were people that really badly needed your help. So have you the phone off the hook now?
Yeah, sorry, it is. Yeah, it's off there now. Sorry about that.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I mean, when I came into Inner City Helping Homeless, we started collaborating, and we said that we would do it 3 days a week, and people could come in and we would look at them, and we very, very quickly identified that people needed and wanted this service, and we also very, very quickly identified that people weren't being listened to. Nobody was being seen as an individual. Everybody was just seen as you're homeless, and this is the service you get. And not everybody that experiences homelessness has an addiction. Not everybody is an alcoholic. Not everybody has mental health issues. In fact, a lot of people, their mental health only starts to deteriorate when they go into homelessness. And it's not a reason for being homeless. It's because that the rents are high. What was spoken about, what Anthony Flynn spoke about, but nobody is seen as an individual. Nobody gets to tell their individual story. And if it continues like that, we're never. If I wouldn't have sat and listened to Asha's individual story, I wouldn't know that she's a singer-songwriter. If I didn't listen to individual stories, I wouldn't know that there's a brilliant artist currently homeless in Dublin, or that there's a brilliant actor currently homeless in Dublin. And these are all the individual stories that are being missed, and they're being put into the mix. And so is lots of other people, but there's no exit plan. It's just like you're in homelessness now, and there's people in there. There's like I've had people that went into homelessness when they were 18 and they're 27 now. That's 9 years of their life. It's such a long time to be in, and it's a pivotal time of your growth, of how relationships are managed, how you look to the future. And how could you really, really look to the future if nobody is listening to you, and none of the individual or your individuality is being is being allowed to grow. You're just in there, and this is what you do. You struggle every day.
And I suppose part of that struggle is dealing with all of the different agencies that a person has to deal with when they're homeless. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we have a lot of people coming to us, and as they speak to us, they would say that they're involved with this, or they were involved with this agency, or they were in this hostel, and they started to work, and then they might have sent off for a medical card, and that's the letter's gone there, but they're somewhere else. And what we've looked for, and we've definitely identified, there's definitely a need for centralised advocacy, where somebody can come and they get an exit plan out of homelessness, but they get somebody that's actually going to be dedicated to them, that isn't connected to a hostel or another service or an NGO, that they're actually just coming in, and they're able to advocate on that, because it's not good to be involved with all these different services without an actual plan and without anybody trying to help you get to the end of it. Well, you like, I think we counted up the last time there was somebody in. They've been engaged with 9 different services, and they've been engaged with those services over a 2-year period, and they were still in the same position as they started 2 years ago.
That's really quite shocking. And, you know, I'm getting a sense as you speak to me that there is a huge demand for the service that you're providing. And I believe that you are providing it in a voluntary capacity without any funding. Is that so, William?
Yes, we have. So there's myself and a team of 7 at the moment that all volunteer. We all volunteer our time. We have 4 in research that are constantly researching and reaching out to people, and reaching out to mental health services and checking that they are what they say they are, and that they've got a good reputation. We have people reaching out because some of the people that we come across need legal advice. So we have a team that's researching and generally trying to build up who we can refer people to. But everybody in Babs is doing it off their own back, all volunteering. We don't get any funding at all. And it can be sometimes up to, during COVID-19, myself and Patrick were putting in anywhere up to 35 to 40 hours a week on top of a full-time job.
That really is incredible. Well, William, thank you so much for sharing that with us, and I will be back to you in a couple of minutes when we have the panel discussion on the hot topic of the week.
Right.
Thank you, William. Back in January, I first met Michael Loughman. I had been very much aware of the work that he's doing. He's set up a Sleep Out Cavan, and I wanted to meet with him. So it gives me great pleasure now to welcome you to Centre Ground tonight, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Anne.
Michael, for people that don't know what you do, can you tell them a little bit about how Sleep Out Cavan came about and the work that you do?
I can. In 2014, Jonathan Curry died, and I was reading it in the paper, and I read that there was a protest going on in Dublin where they would march from the Central Bank to the Dáil to protest that somebody could die on the streets. And we did the protest march, and then we decided we'd sleep on the street that night. And I met a man there. I had never dealt with a homeless person in my life, and I was afraid of him. I didn't know what to make him, what to do, what to say. But during the night, we got to talking, and we made him tea. And when he reached over to drink his cup of tea, I realised that he had no clothes on under his coat. So I asked him, "What clothes have you?" And he says, "I have an overcoat, trousers, and a pair of shoes." And that's all he had in the world. So I went back home and I decided this shouldn't be happening. These people should have some sort of way of getting clothes. So myself and my wife, Dipna, started going to Dublin when we were shopping and bringing carrier bags of clothes with us and handing them out. And I met a guy then called Gabriel O'Neill, who introduced me to Inner City Helping Homeless. And we have developed on from there, where we're supplying them now with 800 bags a year. And another charity, Feed Our Homeless, we're supplying them with a lot of bags as well. In the last few years, we have developed into local areas where we're providing families with clothing. Social workers come to us and they pick out whatever clothes they need and they go off and hand them out to the families. We don't deal with the families. It saves them the embarrassment on that. The biggest shock I've had in the last while is palliative care coming looking for clothing for people who are dying in their houses. They've no one to look after them, no family. Carers now are only allowed 15 minutes in the house, where they used to go in and make a cup of tea and put on a wash. Now they have only 15 minutes because of COVID. So they're coming to us for clothing. We work through a local organisation as well called Cllr, and we supply them with a lot of clothes. The Gardaí come to us for clothes. We have a big outlet of clothes at the moment, as well as supplying the two main charities in Dublin.
And would it be true to say that you're supplying clothes to people right across the Midlands?
Yes, all the counties surrounding Cavan. We have either gone into to get clothes or have gone into to deliver clothes in there.
And are you having any difficulties in sourcing clothes?
No, it's brilliant. The people in all the counties around us are brilliant. We're getting clothes in. We sent off 64 bags to Inner City on Monday morning gone by. Today, myself and Arian, the worker in the centre, we counted 22 bags, I think it was today, ready to go to Dublin whenever they're ready. In actual fact, Anne Briney rang me today. They're coming down tomorrow to pick up those bags.
That's a fantastic good news story. How many volunteers are working with you, Michael?
At the start of it, Anne, we had 9, but because of COVID, some of them have underlying issues and they can't work with us at the moment. At the moment, there's only myself and Irene. Irene is a lady, a Lithuanian girl who was on social, and they put her on this scheme now where she gets 20 euros a week extra on her door money to work for us.
Right. And Michael, if anybody wants to make a donation to Sleep Out Cavan, how may they do so?
They can contact us on the number we have. They also have Facebook, Instagram. We're on Google Maps, Google Business. We're involved in a lot of places where they can contact us.
And you're in Cavan. I think you're beside the college there. I just forget the name of the college that you're on the grounds of that college.
Yes, we're in St. Pat's College in Cavan Town.
Yes, so you're on the, yes. So if people want to contact you and to bring up, now it has to be good quality clothing, I take it. And what else, apart from clothing, is there anything else that you accept?
We take everything, Anne. Shoes, handbags, anything at all. The only things we won't take is bedding and ties.
Right. Okay. So for anybody that's watching in tonight, it's Sleep Out Cavan, and you'll find Sleep Out Cavan and Michael on all the social media platforms. Contact details. It is an amazing charity. As I say, I was there in January. They have a wonderful, wonderful setup, and they distribute then the clothes to the surrounding counties and into Dublin. Well, Michael, thank you so much for that.
Just before you, sorry, Anne, just before you go, I've probably seen it there on one of our photos. We have an ongoing thing at the moment where you can donate €5 to Sleep Out Cavan. That helps us pay our rent and our insurance and stuff like that. And when you donate the €5, you can choose any outfit from the railings. Now, we have put together outfits. Some of them are worth 40, 50 euros, but for €5, you can have those. There's suits, dresses, anything you want.
So how will the person, say if I'm living in Westmeath or I'm living in Longford and I donate, how do you manage to get the clothes? Do you come and collect them? Is that it?
They can come and collect and pick out what they want, or they can pick it offline and we'll deliver it up post and we'll sort something out.
Okay, well that seems like an absolutely brilliant offer, but if you don't want to have the item of clothing, it would be really, really wonderful if you could donate at least €5 to Sleep Out Cavan. Michael and Irene are working there on a voluntary basis, and it is a very, very worthwhile charity. And as Michael has pointed out, they are clothing the homeless people in Dublin, but not alone that, people, families and so on that are in need of clothing. So thank you so much, Michael, for that.
You're welcome, Anne. Thank you.
Now, this brings us to the second part of our programme, the hot topic of the week. And as always, the discussion is introduced and anchored by lecturer and journalist Marion McGowan. Marion, how are you this evening?
Very well indeed, Anna. Thanks very much indeed.
What have you for us?
Well, let me just start by saying, just focusing in on the topic of housing and homelessness. Just to set out my stall, I would begin by saying that housing crisis and homelessness hasn't actually just happened overnight. In fact, I would suggest that it is intentional, and it's a consequence of the way that we have been managing or governing this country. Let me just unpack that a little bit by going back 100 years, if you would allow me to, because this is nothing new. And let me just cite Woodrow Wilson, who is at the time was an academic. And he actually said 100 years ago that he imagined a country where comparatively small group of men, corporate managers, they would wield a power and control over the wealth and the business operations of the country. Now that was said by him over 100 years ago. Now you could be forgiven for thinking that he's been looking at the Irish news over the last 48 hours or so, because it was then that it came to light that Fine Gael TD, Michael Darcy, he was the former Minister of State at the Department of Finance. He resigned his post as a senator and to take up a post with the Irish Association of Investment Managers. Now, mind you, he's not the first TD or person in public office to do this. He joins the ranks of Brian Hayes, who joined the banking sector. Now, this has been described in terms of gamekeeper becoming a poacher, or the gamekeeper becoming poacher, or indeed the revolving door between business and politics in this country. And this actually issue, the details, which has been well advertised on media, raised a number of issues. And the issue that I want to focus in on is the question as to, it begs the question for me, are we consumers or are we citizens? Now, let me just unpack that a little bit. In describing elements he believes to undermine democracy, Noam Chomsky, he points the key principle of neoliberalism. That's running a country on the basis of market. We're running a country on the basis of market. And he says, you've got to let the market prevail. And that includes cut back or destroy social security, cut back on entitlements, cut back on public housing and healthcare. Just let the market do everything, except the government will be powerful when it comes to the rich or the corporations. Yeah, that's where the state is a powerful state, and they're ready to move in to bail out, etc., etc. Now, that's the how. That's the how. And it goes some way to explaining what has influenced political policy and what we are living and going through right now in terms of public services. Think of health, housing. What we've heard this evening, we're looking at charity rather than rights. But that brings me back. Citizens are people who have representation, are people who have responsibilities, are people who have rights and should not have to rely on charity. Consumers, on the other hand, rely on charity, not rights, where access to health, housing is based on your ability to pay. Since when is it okay in Ireland to make a profit from a person's illness or an injury? Where your worth as a consumer, not a citizen, is based on your spending power or your ability to generate an income. Yeah? And within that, it begs the question, are politicians public servants, or indeed are they just professional career politicians who've gotten into it because of the opportunity that it poses in terms of their career, and indeed it's a public or rather it's a family dynasty. So having heard what we have heard from our panelists this evening, taking into account what it means to be a consumer and a citizen, and given what we've heard this evening has been an account of how people, out of the goodness and sense of decency and sense of solidarity, have pitched in there to plug the gaps, and people who are homeless are reliant on charity rather than rights, I put it to our panel, and they're very well placed to answer this. Are we consumers or are we citizens?
Okay, thank you, Marion, for that. It's a very deep question. And maybe if we could begin with you, Anthony.
Let's see, hand me the hard one first.
Oh, Anthony, are you a public servant? Are you? No.
Well, you know
it's
what?
No,
I've had this conversation before, and you know, people.
Yeah.
I think you're correct in terms of. I think a lot of people get into public service or get into, and you know, I don't call myself a politician. I would, you know, I would deem myself a public representative. I didn't get into, you know, I've no aspiration to go to the Dáil. You know, many people that do get into politics, you know, purely because they want to, I suppose, change their communities and help within their communities, and then they aspire to something different and aspire to something. I think I got into it purely because, you know, I was on the outside throwing stones in for a very long time in terms of being a community activist and a frontline worker in terms of homeless services. And I thought over the last year or so that I might have been able to make some change. And what I found is that I'm caught up in red tape and meetings and motions and so forth. You know, and I suppose, like, to get back to your question, are we citizens or consumers? I would hope that you know, people feel in my constituencies that they're citizens, but in the overall, I suppose, scheme of things, we are consumers. You know, we're basically led like sheep at times in terms of how you know, things are rolled out, and it's a situation where, you know, many people, I suppose, get, as I said, do get into that whole political realm thinking that they are going to change something, but we've a whole system that's rotten to the core in terms of career politics and people that have, you know, made absolute livelihoods. There was one man today in the Dáil who was asleep and he's worth 5 million, you know, and he's a career politician. And, you know, there was a picture of that man asleep while there was a statement being made. Like, this is not acceptable to me, you know. So, you know, a consumer is somebody, you know, that buys something. You know, have we bought into this whole narrative that, you know, the government can now do what they like in terms of NGOs being paid to provide services, you know, the market leading the whole situation around housing and homelessness. And you're 100%, Marion, in terms of the market. The market, like I've said this now for near 2 years, that what we have been dependent on is the private market to fix what's a social problem. you know, and that's exactly what we have. We have numerous social problems, whether we were talking about food poverty earlier on, or we're talking about housing, we're talking about homelessness, or we're talking about mental health. All of those are social problems, and we're dependent on the private market to fix those problems. And that's not going to work. It's not going to continue. We've seen it crash time after time. And I think, you know, we're probably heading for one of the biggest recessions we've ever seen before. You know, and who's going to lose out? I think the consumer.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Anthony. Asha, you have been listening now to what Marion has been saying, and indeed to what Anthony has been saying. What are your views on this? Are we consumers or are we citizens? Your microphone is muted. Your microphone is muted.
Sorry, sorry, I'm not the most tech savvy. For me, I don't feel like a citizen or a consumer. Personally, I feel like a little piggy bank that just walks around and people just smash me up to see what money they can take from me. And I mean, I'm pretty renting. I will never, no matter, you have to have people in hospitality. You have to have people. It doesn't make sense to say, oh, if you want to buy a house, then get a better job. You need to have people in hospitality. And if you don't treat people in the lower paid income jobs, if there isn't houses for them, it's very expensive to be homeless, actually. And it's very expensive to be poor. I could have bought 5 houses with the amount of rent I've paid in my lifetime. And I say that really quite confidently because it's fluctuated so much, but I'm never going to have a deposit when I'm working full time in a low income job. That's what I believe. And if we treat lower income jobs like people who work in, even cleaners, nurses, like it's climbing up and up and up. That lower income is becoming more broad amongst all sectors. And if there isn't places for those people to live, you're going to have homelessness. And so that's my answer is I don't think I'm a citizen or a consumer. I'm just a little piggy bank to smash up and I'm the one being consumed, it feels like.
Okay, thank you for that, Asha. William, if I could bring you in, what do you think?
Well, just on the back of what Anthony has said and Asha, we're currently doing some work around human rights and around the violations of rights of people. And we have had this conversation quite a lot on the streets, where people feel that there is the market is dependent on the market, but that if your rights are violated, somebody is making money. And actually, yesterday when we spoke to Asha was out with us, we actually got to speak to a woman who actually said that she feels that she is just there, that she's been through addiction services, she's been through other services, she's been to court, and everybody is making money, but nobody is improving her situation. So I feel that maybe myself, as somebody who works in a kind of in a job where I you know the pay rate is okay, but again I couldn't afford to rent in Dublin, so I feel that maybe I am part of the consumer race, but I also feel that there is a cohort of people that are stuck in this situation where they are dependent on the charities. The charities are making the money, and if we continue that way, there's always going to be a need. The charity is always going to ensure that there's a need for them, because they're the ones that's making the money. And if you go up the ladder in some of these charities, you realize that some people are making an awful lot of money, as you talked about, where CEOs are pulling down big. So I don't think the market is actually going to ever really have the will or the want to resolve the issues. So where does that leave us in the situation of, are we consumers or citizens? Do the good citizens or people need to start kind of saying, you know, we're not going to tolerate this? As Anthony said, we shouldn't be tolerating people falling asleep in the doll. And it's not good enough to say that they have a busy schedule. I have a busy schedule. I would not fall asleep in a meeting, and I would just say no. I can't. I can't be there, or let's reschedule. But I mean, I really don't understand where we're going to go with this. I'm looking at something here, and HAP is to surpass the 1 billion mark. Now, if you look at that, let's think about it. If somebody is in homelessness for 5 years, say, or 3 years, and they get a HAP property, there is a very, very good chance that they may fall into homelessness again down the road, because that's not a permanent home. It's somebody who is renting to them and may need to take it back, or their lease might be up and they may not have a way of getting another place, so they go back into homelessness. So the charities step in. It's almost like we've created a massive industry, and part of that industry and the actual fuel for that industry is people. And I find it very, very, very hard to sit back and take this as somebody who has a social conscious.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. It's as if we have created this system that feeds homeless people into it, so that a select number of people can make a huge, obscene amount of money. And as you say, over €1 billion now in rent support for people that are on low income, so over $1 billion, and that is money that should be spent building permanent homes, social housing for people. Could I bring you in, Michael, and hear your views on what we've been chatting about?
You can, and my view on that is we are consumers. They've guided us that way from the very beginning. They've been pushing us and pulling us around the place to get us into this line where they have us now. They have turned homelessness into a big business. They are actually offering hotels to the government now, rather than getting tourists. It's easier just to have people stay in your hotel. You're not even providing them with the facilities you would in a normal hotel. They just get the basics in it. Asha spoke about it earlier on, what goes on in these hotels. Not only is it homeless people, but you have asylum seekers coming into the country and they're being shipped out into hotels in different counties, all paid for by the taxpayers. Big, big money going in. It's a business. That's what they have created.
Right.
Okay. If I could just come back and just try and pull that together, because what we're looking at here is about a decision about how we run this country. And I think that there's a whole generation of people who forget that we are a country that was based on, and a state that was based on equality and a welfare state, where the 4 pillars of that was access to public housing, access to education, access to welfare, and what's the 4th one? Health, education, and housing. Okay? Yes. Now, the whole way, and this is why I wanted to pull back, it's the what and why this has happened, is that the whole approach to that has been changed, because we're going, no, let's run this country and leave it free to market sources and market forces, I beg your pardon, except when it comes to bailing out. That means that we have seen the running down, because part of market, the whole point of market forces is about profit. It's about profit. And you just mentioned how a number of organizations are profiting. Of course, because this isn't about rights, it's about charity and generating profits. Now, we've got a very clear choice here. Do we want to leave how we are and how we're shaped as a people to market force, or do we want to take a step back and go, hang on a minute, let's just look at how we're deciding and what should be the pillars of a country that we want? Should we be depending on access to healthcare on your salary? Should Should people, have a right to housing? Does a decent education, is that based on your ability to pay? The OECD has said that Ireland has got a dreadful record of investment in education. Sure, but that fits the market economy picture. It means you run down existing services so private services can take over. Just look at the proliferation of private healthcare in this country. So it's about standing back and saying, okay, how do we want this to be? Is this about rights, or is it about profit, or is it about charity?
Okay, Marion.
My penny's worth.
I suppose as we are coming towards the close of our programme, is there anybody that would like to come back in with a final word on this?
Can I just say, Marion, everything you mentioned, so you mentioned everything you mentioned in terms of housing, welfare, hospitals have been privatised. Every single of the 4 pillars that you mentioned, every one of them have been privatised in some way, shape or form. Our welfare has been privatised out to CTEC, to bodies that come in and interview us. Our housing is being left to the markets. We've seen, when I've had discussions over last week in regard to the way we were able to nationalise the hospitals and able to open up the private hospitals and stuff. And, for a small period of time through COVID-19, I actually had belief that we could make change, that we could actually do something. And although myself and Will and Pat and others that were working, and Michael down in Cavan and everything that was going on, I actually saw that there was a change and shift in culture in regard to how we dealt with all of these social problems. But what's happened over the last number of weeks is we went back to the exact same way that we rolled things out from the start in regard to housing, in regard to hospital appointments, in regard to welfare and so forth, and people being stopped at the airport. And just to finish on this, Anna, I would say everything that you did say in regard to the 4 pillars, when you look with the highest rates in terms of housing, with the and rents, with the highest rates in terms of mortgage repayments in Dublin, and we've got the highest student fees across Europe at the moment as well. We've worked with the student union on projects over the last couple of months, and I see that as well, that we've one of the highest. So what that says to you is 100% agreeable to, going back to what I suppose everybody else on the panel has said, that we are consumers. We're being fed into this market like sheep, and every single pillar that you've mentioned, we're paying through the teeth for.
And this week alone, Anthony, we've looked at the mortgage holiday been wiped out. We've also seen that the PUP payment has been reduced. And this is about, actually, hang on, what's the thinking behind that? Thinking behind that is no, we're pulling back. This isn't about a welfare state. This is about profit. And we've got a bank with there's no way of holding them to account. We've seen that with KBC. So basically, the banks and commerce trumps people being protected during a time of pandemic.
I agree.
Where's that coming from? What does that say?
Okay, a final word. Who would like to have the final word? Yes?
I feel a comment coming on somewhere. Come on, guys.
Yes. Okay,
One, Michael,
Asha.
you're never that quiet.
Asha,
a long day, Anthony.
To the lady, I think. Give it to Asha.
Yes, Asha, I have been so struck by your story, because you are actually the person who is in emergency homeless at the moment. You are the person who is suffering. You're the person who is falling through the cracks. And I've been deeply, deeply touched tonight by what you had to say. So I'm going to leave the final word to you.
Well, Anna, thank you very much for having me on. But I'm really from working with William and doing the volunteering work with Inner City Helping Homeless, it might sound like I'm falling through the cracks, but I'm actually very fortunate I'm actually one of the lucky ones. And there's a lot of people out there, and they're not even falling through the cracks, and they're being minced through the cracks, and a lot of them don't survive it.
Yeah.
And I really am one of the lucky ones, and I'm really grateful for Inner City Helping Homeless and Anthony and William for everything that has been provided for me, and even for me to see a future for myself as an advocate. So thanks a million to everyone on this that does care. And when I spoke out in the media, I was really surprised by the amount of homeless people in the city centre who are like, fair play to you. They're afraid to say anything because this is what we're doing to people. They're afraid it's going to affect them getting a bed. They're afraid. So thanks a million. I'm really glad that Inner City Helping Homeless is here and that Williams BAB Service is here. And I'm really glad that there is good people, and I'm glad that I spoke out about it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And that is a beautiful, positive note on which to end, because it has been a tough programme in many ways. We're dealing with a very, very sad topic behind all of the statistics of the 8,000 plus people who are homeless. There is huge pain, huge grief, huge suffering, and half of those are children. So it's a lovely positive note on which to end there from Asha. Thank God for the really good people that are here in this country, and they are Councillor Anthony Flynn, founder of Inner City Helping Homeless, Asha, singer-songwriter, who's now an advocate for ICHH, William Cummings, who is the founder of BAB's Be Aware, Be Safe, supporting people in homelessness who have mental health issues. Michael Loughman from Sleep Out Cavan, a wonderful project providing clothes and other items to the homeless. It has been a huge privilege to speak to you tonight, and thank you so much for coming on Centre Ground. And as always, to my dear friend Marion McGowan, who just takes Centre Ground to a higher level with her very insightful and well-researched input. Thank you so much to all of you. And to those of you who have been watching tonight, I want to thank you for tuning our way. The live stream will be available in its entirety shortly afterwards. And in the days ahead, Stephen will actually provide individual videos for each of our guests tonight. And please share. It's our way of getting our message out to a much wider audience. And I want to finish tonight by saying a very, very special thank you to Stephen Cllr, the Irish Inquiry, who has provided this platform for me to live stream. And it's not just tonight. He puts in at least a day, usually a Tuesday, getting everything organised, videos and everything like that organised for tonight's live stream. I'm really, really grateful to Stephen. So until next Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, have a wonderful week. Bannock Day Arif Cllr.